Step outside on the hottest day of the year and you already know the plan. Find shade, find water. Get inside, where a machine on the wall is quietly holding the entire summer at arm's length for you. Take that machine away and something changes fast. At 40 degrees Celsius in full sun with no water, an unprotected human body starts running out of options in a matter of hours. Not days, hours. Now put that in a world with no walls, no cold water, no shade you did not walk to yourself. For most of human history, a heat wave was not an inconvenience. It was a slow, patient thing that stood between you and tomorrow. So how did anyone survive it? And here's the part that flips the whole story. When it comes to heat, your body is not the weak link. It is one of the most ridiculous pieces of survival equipment on this planet, and almost nobody knows why. Let's go. Let's start with the body itself because everything else is built on top of it. Here is the strange fact. In a straight sprint, almost every large animal on Earth beats you. A dog, a horse, a deer, an antelope, a wild boar. You lose to all of them, badly. You are slow, weak, and have no claws worth mentioning. But extend that race by a few hours in the midday sun, and the ranking flips completely. Over long distances in heat, a healthy human can run down animals that are far faster in a sprint. Not because we are strong, because of one boring, unglamorous thing. You sweat. And you do not sweat a little. A human at full effort in heat can lose well over a liter of water an hour, and in extreme conditions, considerably more. You are covered in between 2 and 4 million sweat glands spread across almost your entire skin. Compare that with a dog, which has almost none across its body and has to dump heat by panting, or a horse, which does sweat but nowhere near as efficiently as you do. That is why our body hair disappeared. A furred animal cannot lose heat properly through sweat because the fur traps the moisture. Bare skin plus a huge number of sweat glands turns your entire body into one enormous cooling surface. Every drop that evaporates pulls heat directly off you. The physical anthropologist Daniel Lieberman has spent years making the case that humans are, in the plainest sense, endurance animals. Long legs, springy tendons, a body that can run for hours, and a cooling system so far ahead of everything else that we can operate at midday, in open sun, when most predators are lying in the shade with their tongues out. Sit with that reversal. The hottest, most dangerous part of the day, the window when almost every other large animal shuts down, was the window our ancestors could own. Heat was not only our enemy, heat was our advantage. Now some of you are thinking, fine, but nobody actually hunted that way. That sounds like a story people tell. Fair question, and the answer comes from people who were still doing it in living memory. Anthropologists have documented persistence hunting among groups in the Kalahari and other hot regions. The method is exactly as absurd as it sounds. You pick an animal, usually a large antelope, and you follow it. Not sprinting, just moving, steadily, in the heat of the day, tracking it whenever it disappears from view. The animal bolts, gets ahead, and then has to stop and dump heat. Because most large mammals cool themselves mainly by panting, and you cannot pant properly while galloping. So it stops, breathing hard, and just as it starts to recover, you appear again. It runs, it stops, you keep coming. Hour after hour, into the hottest part of the afternoon. Eventually the animal cannot regulate its own temperature anymore, and it stands there, unable to run, while a slow, sweaty, thin-limbed primate simply walks up to it. That is your ancestry. Not a beast with fangs, a creature with a water bottle and infinite patience, being the most quietly terrifying thing on the savanna. This idea has a proper scientific home too. In 2004, Dennis Bramble and Daniel Lieberman published a paper arguing that our whole skeleton carries the fingerprints of running. Not walking, running, specifically over long distances. They pointed at a long list of features that only make sense if endurance mattered. Springy tendons in the leg that store and return energy, a large gluteal muscle that stabilizes the torso when you run, but does very little when you walk. A small ligament at the back of the skull that steadies the head with each stride, and shoulders decoupled from the head, so your upper body can rotate against your hips. Chimpanzees do not have that package. We do, and it only pays off across hours. The tracker Louis Liebenberg went further and did the least comfortable kind of research there is. He went out and ran the hunts himself with Kalahari trackers, in temperatures most people would refuse to walk in, and recorded what actually happens. Not a legend told by an elder. A stopwatch, a route, an animal, and a very tired anthropologist arriving at the end of it. So the equipment is remarkable, but equipment alone does not keep you alive because the system has a hard limit, and hitting it is what makes heat genuinely deadly. The limit is water. Everything I just described runs on evaporation, and evaporation costs fluid. Lose roughly 2% of your body weight in water, and your performance and thinking are already sliding. Push further, and the trouble compounds. Your blood volume drops, your heart works harder, and eventually your body has to make a brutal choice. Keep cooling or keep pumping. Beyond a certain point, it can no longer do both. That is why the terrifying number in a heat wave is not the temperature, it is how far you are from your next drink. And water is only half of what leaves you. Sweat carries salt out with it, and if you keep drinking plain water while pouring out salt for hours, the balance inside you tips the wrong way and things start going strange. Confusion, cramping, a headache that will not shift. Ancient people solved this without knowing a single word of chemistry because their food solved it for them. Meat, blood, ash from certain plants, mineral-rich earth at particular licks in the landscape. Some groups traveled remarkable distances to specific salt sources, and salt later became one of the most traded substances on the planet. Long before anyone invented a sports drink, our ancestors were quietly running the same recipe out of an antelope, which reframes the entire problem of ancient survival. Ancient humans did not think of heat as weather. They thought of it as distance from water. And every decision they made in summer was really a decision about that distance. Now let us get to what they actually did, because the solutions are far cleverer than the movies suggest. Solution 1, and the most important, they moved at the right time. The image of the ancient human toiling under a blazing noon sun is mostly wrong. When the sun is at its worst, the sensible move is to do almost nothing, and people who live in genuinely hot places have always known this. Work happens in the cool hours, early morning and late afternoon. Midday is for lying in shade, dozing, doing quiet tasks with your hands. Which means the modern siesta is not laziness. It is a survival protocol that predates every culture that argues about it. Your ancestors invented the afternoon nap because the alternative was becoming a cautionary tale. And the whole year bent around the same logic, right alongside the day. In hot regions, life ran on a seasonal rhythm rather than a fixed address. When the dry season arrived and the small water sources vanished, groups pulled back toward the reliable ones, the deep pools and permanent springs, and stayed within reach of them. When the rains came and the landscape filled with temporary water, they spread out again across country that had been closed to them for months. Nobody was wandering aimlessly. They were reading a map that changed twice a year and moving before the heat forced them to. Some groups pushed this further and simply flipped to the night. Travel after dark, when the air has dropped many degrees and you are not fighting the sun for every step. Under a moon, across open ground in the cool, moving between water sources. The night was not only frightening, it was also, in summer, the most efficient time to be alive. Solution 2. Shade, invented on purpose. Natural shade is not evenly distributed, so people made their own. A simple screen of branches, a hide stretched over sticks, a windbreak that blocks sun rather than wind. The physics are unglamorous but powerful. Standing in direct sun versus sitting under a thin cover can be the difference of many degrees on your skin, and it costs you nothing but a few minutes of work. Caves and rock overhangs are even better, because thick stone keeps a stable temperature all day. There is a reason so much of what we find is under rock shelters. In summer they are cool, in winter they are less cold, and they do it for free. Solution 3. And this one is genuinely counterintuitive. Cover up. The instinct in heat is to strip, bare skin, maximum airflow. But people living in the hottest environments on Earth, in deserts, have historically gone the other way, wearing loose, flowing, full-body clothing. The logic is solid. In severe heat, direct sun is doing something worse to you than the air is. Loose fabric blocks that radiation, keeps a layer of slightly cooler air against the skin, and slows how fast your sweat evaporates straight into the wind, which means you actually keep more of your water. You are trading a small amount of ventilation for a large amount of shade you can carry with you. So a person wrapped head to toe in the desert is not suffering for tradition. They are wearing portable shade, and they are winning. Solution 4. The water map. This is the one that really separates a surviving group from a group in serious trouble, and it is entirely about knowledge. In a hot landscape, water is not evenly spread and it is not permanent. Some sources are seasonal. Some sit underground and only reveal themselves through a certain plant or a particular kind of damp sand in a dry riverbed. Some appear as morning dew that has to be collected before the sun takes it. An experienced elder held a complete map of that landscape in their head, where the water is in the good years, where it is in the bad years, which route between two sources is short enough to survive in August. That knowledge took decades to build and could be shared in an evening, and it was worth more than any tool in the camp. And people engineered storage. Ostrich eggshells make superb water containers, and in southern Africa they have been used for a very long time, sometimes engraved with marks, sometimes buried at known points in the landscape as caches. Think about the sophistication of that. They went beyond carrying water. They left water in the desert for a version of themselves that would arrive months later, thirsty. That is planning across seasons. That is a species thinking ahead. They also learned to pull water out of places that look completely dry. A dry riverbed is often not dry at all. It is a river that has gone underground, and digging into the sand at the right bend in the channel gets you to it. Certain plants function as signposts because they only grow where their roots can reach moisture. Some tubers and melons hold enough fluid to keep a person going. In some regions, people used a hollow reed to draw water up through wet sand, filtering it on the way. None of this is intuitive. All of it had to be discovered, remembered, and taught. And they worked out how to make water colder than the air, which sounds impossible with no machinery. Store water in an unglazed clay vessel, and a small amount seeps through the wall and evaporates on the outside, pulling heat with it, so the water inside sits noticeably below the surrounding temperature. It is the same physics as sweating, applied to a pot. Your ancestors were cooling themselves by evaporation, and then turning around and cooling their drink by exactly the same trick. Solution 5. The body adapts, and faster than you would think. Spend a couple of weeks working in heat, and your body genuinely rebuilds itself for it. You start sweating sooner, before your temperature climbs as high. You sweat more overall. And, cleverly, your sweat gets less salty, because your body starts holding on to salt it can no longer afford to lose. Your blood volume increases too. The effect is large. Someone properly acclimatized handles heat dramatically better than the same person on their first day. Ancient humans lived permanently acclimatized. You, stepping out of an air-conditioned room, are basically a tourist in your own climate. There is a limit to that adaptation, and it lands hardest on the oldest members of the group. As people age, the sweating response weakens, and the sense of thirst gets less reliable, which is a dangerous combination in a heat wave. In a small band, this was not an abstract problem. The elders held the water map, the root knowledge, the memory of the last bad drought, and losing them meant losing the archive. So keeping the old people in shade, near water, out of the worst hours, was not sentimentality. It was protecting the most valuable equipment the group owned. And in the very long run, whole populations shifted. Body shapes in consistently hot regions tend toward tall and narrow, which gives you more skin surface to shed heat relative to your mass. In cold regions, the shape trends compact, which holds heat in. Same species, different climates, different builds, sculpted over thousands of years. Now for the part everyone gets wrong about ancient heat. You would assume the danger was the desert, the classic sun-blasted emptiness. But the real hazard in a hot climate is humidity. And the reason is pure physics. Your entire cooling system depends on sweat evaporating. In dry heat, even at extreme temperatures, sweat leaves your skin fast and takes heat with it, which is why a dry 45 degrees is survivable in shade with enough water. But raise the humidity and the air is already full of moisture, so your sweat stops evaporating properly. It just sits on you, doing nothing, while your core temperature climbs. At that point, your cooling system, the very thing that made our species unstoppable in the heat, quietly stops working. Muggy heat with no wind is far more dangerous than a dry oven, and the ancestors who lived in humid regions had to solve a much harder problem than the ones in deserts. Scientists have a way of measuring exactly this, and it is worth knowing about. You wrap a wet cloth around a thermometer and let the air blow over it. The reading you get is the coldest anything can be cooled by evaporation in that air, which means it is, quite literally, the temperature your sweating body is trying to reach. In dry air, that number sits far below the actual temperature, and you have plenty of room. In humid air, it climbs, the gap closes, and once it gets close enough to your own body temperature, no amount of sweat, shade, or willpower can shed your heat anymore. That is the hard ceiling, and no ancient technique gets around it. The only answers are getting out of it or getting into water, which is exactly what people did. Rivers, lakes, pools, wet mud, wet hides laid over the skin. Immersion moves heat out of a body far faster than air ever will, and it is the one trick that works even when the air has stopped cooperating. A wallow in cool mud is not primitive behavior. It is the correct engineering answer, arrived at independently by humans, elephants, and pigs. So which brings us to the thing this whole video is really about. You are not designed to be comfortable. Everything in your body that handles heat, the sweat, the bare skin, the tolerance, the long legs, is designed to keep you functioning while you are extremely uncomfortable for hours at a time. That is the actual specification, not comfort, function under stress. And then, very recently, we solved discomfort so thoroughly that we forgot the specification existed. So what broke it? A box that makes cold air. Mechanical cooling went from a rare industrial curiosity to a normal thing in ordinary buildings across the 20th century, and it changed human life more quietly than almost any other invention. Whole regions became comfortable to live in year-round. Cities grew in places that summer used to make barely tolerable. Work stopped bending around the weather. And your body noticed. If you spend your summer moving between cooled rooms, you never acclimatize. The adaptations I described, the earlier sweating, the extra blood volume, the salt conservation, only developed through repeated exposure. Skip the exposure, skip the adaptation. Which is why a mild heat wave can flatten a modern office worker, while a person who works outdoors shrugs at the same temperature. We also lost the schedule. Ancient humans obeyed the sun and rested in the worst hours. We keep the same working day in August that we keep in January, then act surprised when we feel terrible because a calendar does not care what the air is doing. And the whole comfort system runs on power. During a heat wave, the moment the electricity fails, a modern building can turn from shelter into a heat trap, because it was designed around the assumption that the cooling never stops. A cave never had that problem. There is one more quiet loss worth naming. We stopped reading the landscape. An ancient person crossing open country in summer knew, without thinking, where the next shade was, where the ground held water, which slope caught the afternoon sun, and which one stayed cool. That was not survival trivia. It was ordinary literacy, the way you read street signs. Almost nobody carries that map now. Put a modern adult in genuinely hot open country with no bottle and no phone, and the problem is rarely the body. The body is still magnificent. The problem is that nobody taught it where to go. So what if the discomfort is not the enemy? What if the sweat running down your back is not a malfunction, but the single most advanced cooling system in the animal kingdom doing exactly what it evolved to do? What if the urge to slow down and do nothing at 3 p.m. is not weakness, but an ancient instruction you are ignoring? What if the reason heat hits you so hard is not that summers got worse, but that you spend your life in a climate your body never gets to practice for? Because here is where all of it lands. Ancient humans survived extreme heat with a body built to bleed heat away. A schedule that respected the sun, portable shade, a map of every water source for 100 kilometers, and the patience to walk an antelope into the ground. They did not fight the heat. They arranged their entire lives around it, and their bodies did the rest. We traded that whole education for a switch on the wall, and most of us have never once found out what our own cooling system can actually do. Here is my question, and I want honest answers. What is the hottest you have ever been, and what did you do to get through it? Tell me down in the comments. And if you made it this far, the next time sweat starts running down your back, remember that you are watching the single best heat management system evolution ever produced. Subscribe, and next time you will never look at an ordinary human body the same way again.